All right, well, I hope you're ready.
Oh, we should get my notes out, though.
Your notes are out,
No, they're
and
not.
we are live.
Those aren't my... Oh,
Those are literally your notes.
we're live right now?
We're live.
You
We
didn't
got to
wanna
do the
wait?
intro.
Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast. We're your hosts, Dan.
And Justin, we ask critical questions about the Bible and usually provide questionable answers, although I got to say, some inventive answers. I've enjoyed hearing some of your maybe not imaginary, but creative
Yeah, I'm not moving
answers
on
to
that
problems.
thing. Isn't that weird?
You literally are moving on it. I'm watching you move.
Oh, it's got like a
I
delay.
don't know why you always do this while we're live.
It's got like a delay. All right.
You know we're live right now, right?
You should have been waiting for me to be ready. All right.
Well,
Let's do this thing. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
we already did the intro.
Oh, all right. Thought we could cut that.
We're live. We will
Yeah.
never be cutting it live.
We'll see.
We can pray about it and see what happens.
Well, who knows, right? Yeah.
I know. You think so?
Maybe. All right.
Just do the intro for the third time.
All right. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast. We are hosts, Dan.
And Justin, we provide critical questions. Nope. We ask critical questions and provide critical answers. You threw me off here. This is going to be terrible.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Good thing we don't have a super long chapter this week, so we can go in depth on everything.
You know what? That's what I was thinking.
And we can do as many rabbit trails as we want.
This chapter is about 1,000 words.
Or are they quail trails?
You made a joke. Hey, can you do me two favors?
Sure, yeah.
One, let me see the chat in case somebody talks.
The chat's up there
Where?
on the
Oh,
screen.
You must have changed this whole thing around.
It's different.
Yeah, I don't like that.
I don't know what to tell you. It's different.
What I like different.
Gotta have it.
All right, can you scroll down to my
You'd be
notes?
the Israelites in the desert complaining about manna and quail.
These are not my notes. This is chapter 15, and we're in chapter 16.
Oh, you mean, yeah, because you are combining two chapters in your notes every week.
The idea,
I have no idea why you keep doing that. We're never going to do two chapters in a week.
I like to think positive.
Wishful thinking.
I'm an optimist.
You are not an optimist.
Just in this one regard.
I know you're right. This is, I've known you for over a decade now,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I would classify you as an optimist.
No, I'm very pessimistic.
But another 3 more decades, and we will have spent the whole time together the Israelites spent in the desert eating manna and quail, which we'll get to. Okay.
We'll get to.
So, all right.
So my point is, there are 1,000 words in this chapter,
Sure.
and I wrote 3,000 words in my notes.
So,
Yeah.
You're more inspired than the Bible?
That sounds blasphemous. For
It
some
is-
reason, I don't know why you would say that.
It is kind of flat. Well, I'm trying to figure out what the point of connection is.
Oh, just that I wrote a lot.
Are you saying you're a better author?
Well, at least more verbose.
Yeah, I'd say definitely more verbose.
Mm.
It's hard, writing a verbose sequence in biblical Hebrew is a little bit of work. It is a tedious written language if you didn't grow up with it. But nevertheless, none of these people knew Hebrew anyways. They would have been speaking Egyptian.
Oh, okay.
Remember But anyways, let's just jump right into 16. Last week, we had the Song of Moses and Miriam.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're on the other side of the Red Sea. They sang the song, which is out of order because no way they learned it right after they crossed the Red Sea because they've only been over there for like a week. And then now there's some grumbling and mumbling.
There is mumbling and grumbling.
Yeah. So let's jump right into it. Let's read verse 1.
All right, let's do it.
Right.
The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after they came out of Egypt. Ooh, the desert of Sin. That's got to be a bad omen, right? Hey, I wonder if this is the same desert that the devil had Jesus tempted at. Probably not, right? Still, it's a crazy coincidence.
Well,
that this desert is called Sin, and the devil was trying to get Jesus to sin.
Sure, except that sin doesn't mean sin in the original languages.
I mean, who knows, right?
The Desert of Sin is named after the peninsula in which the Sinai Mountain is found.
Oh, and so sin to us means like a bad thing. You know what I mean?
Yes, in English, yes, it would mean.
Why didn't they change the original word to something different so that people wouldn't read it and think it's sin?
Because it's the name of it. That's why it's capitalized.
I guess.
That's the name of the place. It just happens to be the name of the place in, the ancient Semitic languages is also a word in English, but
not just a word though.
Certainly
right?
couldn't be by design because it doesn't work in any other language.
Yeah.
We'd have to assume that the Bible was purposely written to be in English for this to make sense.
Why wouldn't it
as
be?
a point of connection?
I mean, we're the greatest nation on earth.
You must be joking.
They were just waiting for us.
That's what it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's continue.
Sure. All right. The Desert of Sin. Okay, so
it's weird though.
What's weird?
The Desert of Sin. And you know what's funny? They
Is it
spent
though?
Well, they spent all their time in the desert sinning.
Well, they did quite a bit of that.
That was a coincidence.
And we're like literally on the precipice of reading about some of the great sins in just a couple chapters.
Yeah, I don't think we've done too much in this chapter.
No, there's no real bad sinning yet. It's just
a bunch
mumbling.
Of grumbling.
Yeah. Murmuring. That's a good word, isn't it?
That's
I like
pretty
murmur.
great, yeah.
So yeah, interesting here. The wilderness of sin is between Elim and Sinai.
Yes.
And that's nothing really unique. In fact, I'll put the map on the screen so we can kind of track their progress together.
Oh, neat.
And so remember, initially they had crossed down here. Some people believe they could have crossed up here, but I think it's more likely that they crossed down here where the canal.
What's that? The Red Sea?
Where the Gulf of Aqaba.
It's got to be a really thin area, right?
Well, I don't know what the length is. What I'm saying is where the Gulf of Aqaba gets closer to the mouth of the sea is most likely where they crossed near Migdol. But the wilderness, to get to where they're at now, this is the crazy thing. They crossed over, then they went up north past Horeb through Midian, and then they seemed to congregate in the wilderness of Paran, and they went north again, and then they migrated out. Now, where they're at now is actually back on the western side of the sea, which means they would have had to loop all the way back around. That's if you think that Mount Musa is in fact where Sinai was. However, this map thinks that Mount Sinai and or Horeb is on the right side, which you'll see here. And this is the workable solution. This is a solution that is provided by Bible.ca. I think Bible.ca is a fantastic website. And here they're associating Mount Sinai with the eastern side of the Red Sea, which I'm perfectly okay with. Other maps on the internet will show it back on the western side, which I get. I know why they think that. I understand. But for just paying attention to the story so far, it makes sense that it's located on the eastern side of the Red Sea, because why would they cross it just to come back? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Unless they were only crossing it to get away from the Egyptians. And, maybe they never meant to cross it, right?
Right.
Anyways, the long and short of it is...
The Red Sea?
Yeah.
They never meant to cross the Red Sea?
That's what I'm saying. Is it possible they only crossed the Red Sea in an effort to get away?
If they weren't being chased, they'd probably do something less dramatic.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right.
Like build rafts or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, what I'm saying is there's no reason if the mountain they were getting to was on the western side of the Red Sea of the Gulf of Aqaba, there would be no reason to cross it. What I'm suggesting is perhaps they only crossed it because they were being chased and they needed a way to get away from the invading army.
Oh, and then they crossed back over again. But they didn't mention that miracle.
Right, that's what I'm saying. The Bible doesn't really mention them crossing back over or going around the Gulf to get back over.
Okay.
Which is why I do agree with the map done by Bible.ca, suggesting that it is, in fact, on the eastern side in the region of Midian. And I think we've talked about this before. We've talked about the Midian hypothesis, about how Yahwism may have actually found its origin in Midian and then migrated north into Judea. So this is, I think, where we're at right now. I think we're basically near this region. We're in the wilderness, and there's going to be some mumbling and some grumbling. But because we're located here, next chapter becomes difficult. And I can't tell you what happens in the next chapter, but when we get there next week, you're going to understand why it's strange that we're here right now, but next week, with almost no mentioning, we're going to be somewhere else. There's a migratory pattern that we get to, but it doesn't tell us how we get there.
Okay. So it's okay that I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. Next week, we'll discuss the migratory pattern in depth as to why it's problematic.
Okay.
In chapter 17 of their location. For now, all we need to know is that according to the biblical timeline, the most coherent location is just on the eastern side.
Okay. All right, where's Egypt?
Well, Egypt's way away from here.
Oh. Well,
Egypt's back here.
Do they do a lot of walking or something?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so Egypt's there, and they had to walk all the way to the Red Sea.
Yeah, they walked all the way down the straits next to the Gulf of Suez.
Okay.
Then near Migdol, it says, between Migdol and the sea is where they held up.
And that's where they crossed.
Then they crossed here, yep.
And now where are they trying to get to?
Well, they don't have a destination.
Oh, well.
Like, God has never said that I'm taking you out of Egypt to go specifically to a location.
To the promised land.
Yeah, see, the end goal is the promised land, but
where's that?
Well, it's up here.
Oh, so they could have just swung right back up and hit that place.
Well, they couldn't. It says in the prior chapters that the Lord took them through this particular path so that they wouldn't be immediately tracked down by the Egyptians.
Actually, they could have just went straight through there, couldn't they?
That is the normal way.
Okay.
When Joseph goes back into the promised land from Egypt to bury his father, or when he's buried, I forget. When we read somebody had to lead, they left Egypt. I think it was when they buried Jacob. They left Egypt and they buried Jacob.
Hey, look, there's Jerusalem there.
Well,
is that
obviously,
the same Jerusalem as now.
Well, you think there's two of them?
So that's where Israel, present day, is.
Have you never seen a map of Israel?
Mm-mm.
My goodness. Don't you look at the map when you're reading the Bible?
I mean, there's no map on the Bible.
You don't have a map in your Bible?
I don't.
Wait,
what?
I mean, you're on the internet reading it and you're not looking at the map?
There's no map on the Bible Gateway or whatever.
Yeah, you get multiple tabs. You just open a new tab and type in the name. Like, where the hell am I tab?
I wasn't that interested.
You don't know where any of these places are?
Oh, I do now.
Oh, my goodness.
How
do you follow along the story if you don't know where anything is?
I don't, and then I just ask you questions and you tell me.
That's crazy.
It works.
I couldn't read a narrative if I didn't know where any of these places were. I'd be like, then they traveled to a place unknown. Where's the place unknown?
It doesn't matter to me.
It matters to me.
I know, but it doesn't matter to me.
So weird that it doesn't matter to you.
It's not like I know where any of these places are or what their relevance is or anything.
That's the point. You would know how they're relevant if you were looking them up.
I mean, I could say they all went to Akron, Ohio or something.
Sure,
It wouldn't matter to me.
Oh, all right. Well, anyways, the long and short of it is...
All right, so they crossed over, let's see there, and they're on this, and now they have to cross and go over to there to the promised land, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Basically, yeah. I mean...
So what's the... and that red is the loop they made?
Well, we haven't got that far yet.
Okay, but that's what they're doing for 40 years, I guess?
Kind of, not so much.
In there.
No, it's more complicated than that.
But pretty much?
No.
All right.
This is just the Exodus map. This isn't the wandering. We can cover the wandering later. The long and short of it is, for anyone wondering where in the hell are they at the beginning of chapter 16, they're just on the eastern side of the Red Sea still.
Well, let me see that map again.
Okay.
So they cross the Red Sea. Now what do they do?
Nothing.
I mean, when they start moving. Did they start moving yet?
No.
In this chapter?
No.
So none of that has happened yet?
None of it's happened. I have no idea why you think that's the thing. I told you they're down here. at Mount Horeb.
I know, but you
Or
showed me
almost to Mount Horeb.
well, you showed me a map, and there's a lot of lines, and I figured
I don't know why you thought that I was showing you that they were up here in Jericho. You think what are they doing in Jericho? They're not in the promised land yet. It's crazy.
I mean, I don't know. All right.
All right. We made it through not even one verse yet. The most important part about this verse is the irony, by the way.
Of the sin desert, yeah.
No, it's better than that. Better than that. The irony is that what day of the week is it here?
I'll tell you what day it is. 15th day of the second month.
That's
so
right.
February 15th.
Do you recognize what happens on the 15th day of the month? Do you remember what we read a couple chapters ago?
Yes, I do.
The feast
It's the feast
of unleavened bread.
Of unleavened bread, yes.
Yes, okay. So exactly a month on the starting day of the feast, they're hungry.
Oh, okay.
Right? And now, you might say, well, that sounds like a narrative plot. And maybe it is. I don't know. But I don't even think this needs to be a narrative plot. I think it's very coherent that a month ago they had this big old feast, which is on the new moon. Okay? So when the moon transitions, the last day of the moon and the first day of the full moon, or the new moon, you have this big old feast. And remember, they track their days by the moon, not by the sun. So now all these people are used to tracking the days by the moon. We got a full moon, and like, oh damn, just last full moon we had full bellies. Like we were, it was delicious. It was great. We're eating lamb and goat. Now we're out here in the desert starving. I'd grumble too. Someone took me out of land of Egypt to take me into the desert starving, and literally the last full moon, I had a great meal. Although it's kind of weird that they don't trust God still at this point.
Well, they weren't going to have a feast every month, right?
No, what I'm saying is the new moon.
You have a full moon every month?
Well, the moon cycles every month, doesn't it?
Oh, it does?
Now I got to check. Is there a full moon every month?
I didn't think so.
There are 12 full moons in a year.
All right, never mind.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the name in Hebrew for a month is literally the same as the name for a new moon.
Oh, really?
So there should be a new moon every month. That's how they came up with the monthly system.
That's cute.
Yeah.
Okay. What?
Anyways, so that's what I think is happening in verse 1.
You know what I was thinking?
What?
I was thinking maybe they were just trying to throw in a bunch of details to make it look more realistic. Like when people are lying, like, oh, I better throw in a lot of details because obviously I'm not lying if I remember all this.
It's true because we gave excessive detail.
Right.
I get that. That's not what's happening, though.
Could be, though.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's a lie?
No, I'm just saying it's one of those things that could be the case.
Creating a fine line now.
Well, we're just having one of those solipsisms.
Solipsism? That's not what solipsism means.
Kind of.
That's not what that means.
Kind of.
So not at all. Let's read verse number 2 there, good buddy.
All right. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. That's like 2.5 million people grumbling. That probably sounds like a swarm of bees or like living next to a drag strip.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it was just like 200,000, I saw a lot of people grumbling.
Well, I was curious about that because, like, mumbling and grumbling, there's been some internal complaints among the people group, or like, when there's a new change at work and all of the employees are kind of internally complaining until the complaining catches wind of the people in charge.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the way I'm reading the passage, is like, I don't know if all of these people are literally coming to Moses and Aaron complaining as much as the complaints are they're spreading so large
Mm.
that they're reaching Moses and Aaron.
I get it. I
You
get
know,
it.
but it's an interesting thing. One thing that people don't do, and you're doing a good job of doing it, is re- remembering the numbers given in the Bible,
Oh.
because it might be easy to backtrack and think, "Oh, we've got a couple thousand people in the desert." No, according to the Bible, there's 2.5 million
Mhm.
people in the desert. It's 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 wild that it's just Moses and Aaron leading these people.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
How is two people managing 2.5 million people? And that'll get relevant in the next chapter as well. We're going to talk about the numbers and whatnot. But um, that being said, should we read verse 3?
Sure. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death."
Not dramatic at all.
What's weird is, like the Israelites admit that God is real, right?
Yeah.
Presumably also admitting that at least some of this was God's idea. But then they're like, couldn't God have just killed us in our sleep or something?
Yeah, I'm sensing like,
Like, this is all God's idea just to prolong our suffering or something.
a little bit. It kind of reads like, if God is going to bring us out here and treat us like this, why did not have just executed us along with the Egyptians?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I guess they're probably feeling as though they're being punished
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, right?
Well,
And
that comes later.
to be fair, like, they would be hungry. It's been a month.
Well, here's something I want to say. It feels weird that God or Moses or whatever decided to wait until the Israelites were near death and begging before the discussion of food was even brought up.
Yeah.
Or are we just assuming the Israelites were drama queens?
So I thought about that as well because, again, remember, there's 2.5 million of these people in the desert, and how many animals could they have realistically brought with them? Certainly, they're not going to find food in the middle of the desert for the whole group of people. That's not realistic. Certainly, they didn't all bring enough food to sustain themselves for an entire month. So there's some really weird questions, like what were they eating for the entire month, and did they just only complain once like the food ran out, and then they're like, well, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
Seems like a failure of leadership to wait an entire month until the food's gone, like you said, and be like, oh my goodness, I didn't see this coming.
I mean, the Israelites were probably waiting a while going, don't mention it. Don't mention it.
It'll come up eventually. Moses knows what's going on. They parted the waters.
They have to eat too.
Exactly. Moses don't want to be hungry. So that's a good point, because, like, again, if you're putting yourself in the story as you're reading it, just this crazy scenario of 2.5 million people in the desert, they're going to be starving. There's not enough food to sustain that large of a people group for an entire month.
I don't know if I really like that we continue to say it's 2.5 million, because I think that we've already proven that there's probably like 200,000,
I mean, realistically,
it's
it's got to be way under 1 million.
I don't know. I mean, because it feels like we're discussing something that's so improbable. And you know what I mean?
Why did my screen go black?
That's a very good question.
Oh, well. Oh, we're still recording. But
Hooray.
whether it's improbable, like whether or not the number is improbable,
Doesn't mean it's less improbable to have 200,000.
that's the thing, is like, do we just accept that the number given in the Bible is just wrong? Is that what we have to do here?
I was doing that because obviously 2.5 million people is ridiculous.
A lot.
Right.
It's larger than the population of Egypt at the time period.
Well, I guess that's why they thought they were, overrun by them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many people were in Egypt?
Well, yeah. Excuse me. The
Not
estimates
according
vary.
to the Bible. According to
According to history, the estimates are variable.
Okay.
Some people say under 1 million.
Well, we know that the Israelites were becoming, I mean, did in the Bible it say there were more Israelites than Egyptians?
Yeah.
Then there had to have been at least 1,000,000.
Right.
So it can't be 200,000.
Right.
See, now we don't know the number again.
Well, but if the population of
Mm-hmm.
Egypt included the Israelites, they would be part of that, which means it would be 500,000 or
Well, you should
so.
have said that. Now I feel ridiculous.
Well, obviously, if they were living there, they were part of the population.
All right, well then, I don't know.
But the economy would have collapsed if not just from the plagues,
Yeah,
but from 50% of your GDP leaving. Those were the people that
yeah,
were creating the most economical benefit.
true, yeah. They were working for free.
Right. Could you imagine if 50% of America just up and migrated to Canada, what that would do to the economy? Destroy it. But nevertheless,
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of people and they would be hungry.
Do we ever hear about Egypt after this?
Yeah.
Like, just in the Bible?
Oh, Egypt comes back over and over again.
Oh, so they were able to pull themselves up and
Yeah.
wipe the plagues off. And
Egypt found their bootstraps. Don't worry about them.
okay,
They'll be all right. This is definitely not the last we've heard of Egypt.
I'm surprised anybody's alive.
Well, why?
Well, there were 10 plagues, if you recall.
Well, yeah, there was 10 plagues. The army got swallowed alive. All the firstborn are dead. That's pretty devastating. Imagine that their army was roughly the same size as the Israelites' army. That means they lost 600,000 people.
And I mean, there were all those plagues with gnats and stuff. And there were so many people were breathing them in. You know?
Sure, yeah.
So they were filling their lungs, and you'd have to die.
There's a lot of cases of pneumonia.
That's funny.
See what I did there?
Yeah, you did a good one.
That's pretty good. All right. Every once in a while.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I'll take the beating for that later. All right, let's read. Let's jump into verse 4. You got a lot of notes. You got notes on every verse here, eh?
Well, I here's the thing. I thought to myself, are we going to do 2 chapters? No, we're not. Does it matter?
You finally came to grips with reality.
Well, I'm like, no matter how short the chapter is, no matter how little there's to talk about, he's never going to do 2 chapters. Therefore, I'm just going to write whatever I want.
Sure.
We're just going to burn the time. Even if there's nothing to say, I'm going to say it.
I mean, I expect nothing less.
Then, all right, we're good.
Just say what's on your heart, man.
This is what's on my heart.
All right, let's have it. Let's read verse 4.
All right. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. Bread, you say? And here I thought it was manna. In fact, I thought manna was some sort of special thing that contained all the nutrients for the body. Kind of like that prison meatloaf, except probably more tasty.
Well, it describes it later in the chapter and calls it manna. Yeah, I guess you wrote that note before you read the whole chapter.
Yeah, that's how I write notes.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I will go back and revise my notes once I realize my note needs revised, but that's fine. Yeah.
I did have to do one of those.
Later in the chapter, it tells you even what it tastes like. It says it tastes like honey.
I know, but
I mean, I love honey.
Yeah, it's hot, but
like,
it's just odd because is manna just like a Hebrew word for bread or something?
No, the Hebrew word for bread would be lechem.
Then why do they say manna if it's bread?
That's what they call it.
What?
Manna.
The stuff that fell from the sky that was bread, they did not call bread.
Right. Well, that's the other problem is from just a purely semantic note, the word for bread in Hebrew is identical with the usual word for food.
Oh, that's not helpful.
No. So sometimes it could say either food or bread. Either one of them would be.
I will rain down food from heaven for you.
Right.
Boy, doesn't that make a lot more sense?
It actually does.
In fact, these people got it wrong. We should write a letter to them.
I don't know if they did get it wrong. That's the problem when you have a word that could be translated one of 2 different ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little difficult to know precisely which one they're referring to when they're using it.
I think they were using food.
But it does say lekam min hashemayim, which means bread or food from heaven.
Okay.
But tradition has always held that it was a bread-like substance, like a wafer.
Yeah.
In fact, Christians throughout the centuries have equated the manna from heaven to be similar to the Eucharistic wafers.
I thought it was like a meatloaf or something.
Meatloaf?
Yeah, meatloaf.
But that's what the quail is for.
Yeah, but meatloaf is meat and bread.
But bread doesn't have any meat.
Yeah, but meatloaf does.
But just not meatloaf because it doesn't have any meat.
I know, but
that's why they have the quail.
I know, but I thought it was meatloaf.
Okay, certainly couldn't be meatloaf. There's no meat in it.
Yeah, but I thought if there was meat in it, there would be meat.
It'd be like bread loaf.
Well, then that's just a loaf of bread, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's what it is.
Well, I didn't remember that they had brought quail as well.
Well, that's why I got to revise your notes once you read the whole chapter.
No.
That's too much work.
No, it's just this is more authentic.
That is a bridge too far.
All right.
Okay, but they're gonna get meat later. Now, let me ask you a question. Okay,
Yo.
I was gonna bring this up later, but since you brought it up, the meatloaf.
Yes.
They've got bread-like substance, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
They've got quail.
Mm-hmm.
What are the many combinations in which they would, because they ate this for 40 years, remember?
Well, we're going to get into that as well, actually.
Do we want to do this now or later?
Maybe later.
Because
I get into that as well when it mentions that they've been eating it for 40 years.
Okay, both of us had some things to say about that. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case,
I have
then
every single verse I have something to say, okay?
of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the only thing that really stood out on verse 4 for me was the fact that God needs to test them.
Well, yeah, this is true.
We've seen this before. We've talked about it before. Why it says that in that way I will test them whether they will follow my instruction or not. But God doesn't need. He knows they're not going to follow his instructions. He knows this.
Or how's this? They already went from Egypt and are wandering in the desert. Isn't that good enough following?
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Like they're out there hungry, and there's like it took them like probably 2 weeks of being starving. And we're like, listen, we need something, guys.
Probably poking people, saying, "Hey, you tell them."
That's right. I don't know. I don't want to be the guy. I don't. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Oh man! All right, let's read verse 5.
Okay. On the sixth day, they're to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days, because it's the Sabbath. Yeah, I listen.
You did. I'm proud of you.
That was all I had to say.
That's all that needs to be said. If lest anyone not realize what's happening here, the goal is to not work on the Sabbath, and this comes up later in the chapter, so I'm not going to beat the horse dead until we get to the the latter portion.
Right.
Okay. So let's do verse 6 here.
So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Oh, and then there's more. "And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" Yes. All right, next.
Oh, did you? I thought you had some notes you wanted to read here.
Yeah, but I realized this was the next verse explained it, so I just...
Yeah, okay.
See, so sometimes I do change them.
Oh, I'm proud of you. All right, we'll include verse 8 then. We'll do verse 8 and then we'll do the notes.
All right. Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord."
Okay.
Ooh, so Moses is like, "Listen, I'm just doing what God told me to. If you got a problem, you take it up with him."
That's actually what's happened here.
Kind of throwing God under the bus.
Right. That's a good point. God didn't really come down and say that you're grumbling against me. that's something that kind of Moses interjected.
Mm-hmm.
And that being the case, was Moses taking some liberties here?
Well, I mean, we already know he takes a lot of liberties, right?
He does do that, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But God never says, "Hey, Moses, just read from the script or anything."
right.
So
Sometimes you gotta take liberties
he must be on
when
board.
you're in charge.
You know what I mean?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the next time Moses and God had a conversation, God was like, "I saw what you did there,"
Yeah.
but apparently God has big shoulders. I think he can handle it, right?
Sometimes he is. Well, there's just like a huge chip on there.
He does overreact from time to time.
And then underact a lot too.
2 Samuel chapter 6, I believe. I believe is it 1 Kings chapter 6 or second? It's 2 Samuel chapter 6, I believe, where they're carrying the ark, and the oxen that are carrying the ark during the march kind of stumble.
Okay.
And a guy reaches out to steady the ark.
Yeah.
And it says that the anger of the Lord was kindled against him, and he struck him dead. I was like,
right.
What'd he do?
Mm-hmm.
He does. He gets a little heated sometimes for no good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you get grumpy in your old age.
Yeah. And he's at least a few billion years old.
Yeah, he's seen some stuff.
Or at least 6,000, but he's old.
He's just tired of their crap.
I get it.
Trying to be helpful, not let the ark fall on the ground.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so verse 8, yeah. I agree. God kind of got thrown under the bus there, but also in the little paragraph that we read, what's interesting, it says, let me grab it again. The verse, you'll know. There we go. Verse 8. You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread. But God never said he was going to give anyone meat yet. So if this is your first time reading this and you don't already know how the story ends,
Yeah.
you'd be inclined to believe that God, like Moses, made that up. God didn't say that. You know what I mean? Because God never said he was giving him any meat. God said he's going to give him the manna. So
Moses and God must have already talked.
Well, you know how we were kind of mentioning about how Moses might have had some liberties?
Yeah.
What if Moses went out there and said, listen, God will give you meat to eat in the evenings and manna in the mornings, and God was like, God, now I got to give him meat to eat. You think that Moses pulled one over on God?
That's possible.
I could see that happening.
God was like, I was testing them, Moses.
Yeah. He basically talks him off the ledge later in like chapter 32 or 33. God's ready to execute all the Israelites, and Moses has to talk them down.
Very nice of Moses.
They have a relationship. There's some give and take,
Yeah.
in the Mosaic Yahweh relationship. Maybe this is one where Moses took some liberties. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that they just randomly threw in there, hey, you have meat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do see here. 9. Yeah, verse 9. Make sure there we go. It's on the screen properly.
Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.
Yeah. Should we do verse 10?
I think we should. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud.
Right.
So, was it just like a really pretty cloud? Or, I mean, how was it obvious that it was God's glory? Was it just another pillar of cloud?
See, that's the thing, is it's not very well described. We assume the cloud is similar relationally to smoke. So we see the same thing when the cloud fills the tabernacle or the temple, but it seems to have been really a product of like the incense and the smoke. So it's possible here that the cloud is synonymous with the pillar of fire and smoke, There's fire by night and smoke by day.
Okay.
What I'm sensing.
So it was never a cloud.
It, well, it was, and what I'm
It was
suggesting.
always smoke.
Well, no.
No, okay.
It was smoke during the daytime because you can see smoke during the daytime, and it was a pillar of fire by night because you can see fire at night.
But it was never a cloud.
Well, the cloud is the smoke, so I'm suggesting.
Well, so you're saying they're synonyms.
Yeah, they're roughly equivalent.
Okay, so when they say it's a cloud, they mean it's a cloud of smoke.
Yeah, that's what I'm gathering.
There we go. We got it.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
I knew we'd get there eventually. Yeah, that's what I'm gathering, is that's what's happening here. But one of the things interesting, it says, say to the entire Israelite community. It doesn't really say here that they've really set up a system of communication yet.
Yeah, it's a lot of telephone, I guess.
Right. How are they? How do you communicate? Okay, God issues a command to Moses and Aaron.
Pass it on.
Right. And Moses and Aaron pass it on to who and how? Because have you ever been to an amphitheater? Okay. You're at an amphitheater, even in a big city. What are you going to see? A couple hundred people there? And even delivering a message between a couple hundred people in an amphitheater is a little difficult.
Right, yeah.
Well, how do you do it with potentially hundreds of thousands of people? Because even like, you've been to a major city like Cleveland or Cincinnati or and like just migrating from one part of town to the other is a nightmare. Well, I couldn't imagine doing that in ancient times on hand and foot, and then trying to deliver it. We can barely get mail from point A to point B using vehicles in a couple days.
Well, they do their best, but yeah.
It's hard. It's a hard thing to fathom. The story. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't know. Is it possible that God wasn't appearing in smoke, but he was skywriting?
No, I don't think so.
That would be cool, though, right?
But my theory is this.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't say so already, I bet there were already leaders selected. And we're going to see some of them pop out soon.
Well, there already were leaders before that. I mean, when they were among the Egyptians. So
exactly.
It makes sense the structure would stay very similar, right?
Well, that was my concluding thought. When I was reading through it, is they must have retained some of their leadership from when they were still in Egypt.
I mean, they were able to get messages across back then.
They had the elders too.
Yeah, so probably just the same system, whatever that was.
That's my guess, is the elders are now answering to Moses and Aaron.
That makes
right.
Makes sense.
I think that's the easiest way to understand the passage, because otherwise it's chaos.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Let's do 11 and 12.
All right. The Lord said to Moses, wait, that was one verse. The Lord spoke to Moses. That's one verse. Okay.
There's got to be a good reason for that. You know what? I wasn't even thinking about that when I read it, but that had to have happened. I bet when they originally did the verse numbering, I bet there was some stuff actually there that got cut out later. They might have did the verse numbering on a manuscript that had additional detail. I'm gonna keep reading. I'm gonna make a note in that. I'm gonna look up all of the ancient manuscripts later tonight and see if that's the reason why that happened, or if somebody was just on drugs.
Okay. So the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord, your God. I'm guessing they probably still had to eat the bread unless it just like materializes inside their stomach.
Well,
that would be weird, though.
That would be weird. My understanding is what was happening here is just that God is, because he said he's going to test them.
Yeah.
And this is part of the test, is that, I'm only going to give you what you need for the one day.
It's possible that God's original test was to just let them go hungry. But then Moses, ruined it by saying, hey, God's going to give you food. And God's like, okay, I'll test them with the food.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
It's a fair point. It's kind of a cruel test to, just to starve them out and see what happens.
Well,
You know what I mean?
got to
Like,
show that they have faith in God, that they're not going to just die.
I don't know if these Israelites really love me. Let me starve them out.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Would you put it past him?
No, I would not.
I'm just saying.
No, I would not. All right, let's read 13.
That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp.
Right. Yeah.
So this is dead quail? Is that what they're saying? So basically, in the middle of the night, a really strong wind came and brought with it a bunch of quail, and this wind was so strong that it smashed into the quails and killed them, similarly to squeezing berries.
Okay, so here's the thing. There's actually a really good explanation for this, and I debated whether I should even put it in my notes because I know it's going to be your favorite explanation forever now.
Go ahead.
But it's the most commonly known phenomenon within biblical scholarship. I'll just read you the note. It says, the quail that breeds in Europe and Western Asia migrates to Africa for the winter, passing through Palestine and Sinai. Headwind or exhaustion can force it to the ground where it can be easily caught. This is a known migratory pattern of quail, which means what's happening here is God is, as you always hope, is working within the laws of nature to bring about, to accomplish the goals that he wishes to accomplish.
That's very interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting.
That kind of supports other theories too, then.
Well, here's the interesting thing, though.
God really likes using wind.
But he does love a good wind. Yes.
Yeah. Loves a good wind, yeah.
So, okay, but here's the thing. I'm trying so hard not to say inappropriate jokes about wind, but
okay.
Right. This is a migratory pattern. Okay. That being said, that means for part of the year they wouldn't be present, which means God is still doing a miracle because they're there during the periods in which they wouldn't be migrating there. So, and I can't believe I'm saying this. So theoretically, he could just use more wind to push them there.
There you go.
I know that is putting more wind in your sails for the berry theory, which I would never do on purpose. But it's a plausible solution.
It is. It is very plausible.
I'm just hoping we can get through one chapter without the berry wind.
You know what?
Becoming a discussion point.
I feel like I'd want to just get a divinity degree just so I can make that my master's thesis.
I mean, it would be interesting. I would read it.
Well, thank you. That's one person.
Sure.
Let's hopefully that
your advisor would have to read it too, obviously.
Yeah, or skim it at least.
That's realistically. I've turned in some papers before where I was like, oh yeah, he didn't actually want to really grade this rigorously. He just wanted to get the grading done. Because like when I reread it, I found mistakes myself. That doesn't happen too often, but that does happen sometimes. All right, we just read 13, right?
Well, when do quail migrate across to Egypt normally?
Winter.
Okay, so in February.
Well, they migrate south just like they do here in the States.
Right, so in February.
Yeah, so this would be winter. Yeah, they'd be there.
Well, that's that's.
Well, this isn't February though. This is technically.
I said February 15th, and you said that's true.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking. No, it's not February. The first day of the year is not January for them.
Well,
the first day of the year is roughly the 1st of April.
Should have corrected me.
I did. I'm correcting you now.
I know, but it's a little too late.
It's the month of May right now.
All right. So that's when quail would be out.
And they'd probably be heading back home by now.
Oh, home?
To Europe. That's what I said.
So they would pass by Egypt on the way?
What? We're not in Egypt.
Well, I know, but we're near Egypt.
We're in the Negev.
In the what?
We're in the desert, the wilderness.
Yeah, right. The wilderness of Egypt.
No.
I mean, it's close by.
I mean, ancient Egypt, maybe, if you assume that at this
That's
time
what-
period, Egypt owned the entire, Palestinian region, which technically they kind of did.
No,
but
I mean, they were only, like a few hours away, walking-wise, right? Walking distance.
a couple days away.
Well, a few hours of days, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you said the quail are going to go from, so where do they normally live?
North, where it's colder.
Okay. Wait, they live where it's colder? No, they would live where it's warmer. But then it gets
No,
colder.
they live where it's colder. They migrate south when winter shows up to a place that's not cold during winter. Identical to what happens here in the States.
I mean, is it possible they actually live in the south then and then migrate north when the south gets cold?
Well, that is a tricky question, but they
All
spend
right.
more time in the north than the south, so it's deemed that they live in the north.
Okay, but I make a good point.
I'm seeing what you're saying, but if you spend more time in one location than the other, then people will just by nature say that you live in the one
It's a
location.
bit of an ad hominem attack, so.
Not ad hominem attack. This is misusing logical fallacies.
All right. All right.
Anyways, right.
So it could be the case that the quails were flying around and then got tired and fell to the ground and then they just took bites out of them. That's what you're saying.
But listen, okay. All right, listen, okay. Here's the thing, though. All right. There's 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people in the desert,
Okay.
and they're eating manna and quail.
Yeah.
Right. It says in the evening, quails, which I always thought quail itself was singular and plural. You can use either one. I didn't know quails with an S was ever a thing.
Well, maybe it's just the translator doing it wrong.
Maybe I mean,
Whales.
for the sake of discussion, let's see what it says in the King James Bible, because I don't, in English I didn't think that quail had a plural until I was reading this.
I'll just Google this as well and see.
All right, let me see what it says. It says quails in the plural. I must have been wrong. My brain is not fully functioning.
No, you were right.
I was right?
Yeah, it's just the whatever you're looking at that's wrong.
Oh. Well, what source you got?
So the thing about that is, plural is quail or quails.
I thought so.
Therefore, the plural is actually quail. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because usually what happens is the plural is quail, and then very stupid people like Americans are like, oh, it must be quails, and then eventually the language catches up with the stupidity.
I believe that, yeah.
Yes.
I believe that. Okay, good. All right, well, with that out of the way then,
I made a good point.
that's a very good point, actually. Let's read verse 14.
All right. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. Maybe it was just frost. Can you imagine
I keep
seeing...
noticing that your translation's different than the one we're actually using. Is there a reason why you never use the right translation?
I was just using the one that came up. I didn't really think about what translation we were doing.
No idea
Why?
why you keep doing this. Is this the NAB again?
Looks like NIV.
NIV. Different translation every week. I don't know why we're never going to standardize on a translation. All right. It says when the layer of dew lifted,
Okay.
there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine flaky substance as fine as frost on the ground.
It's like the same exact thing that I just said.
But there's some problems here.
Okay.
Okay. It says that it's very fine, like a frost. Are we to assume that it's fine? I'm imagining like a brown sugar,
Okay.
where it's granular but it's still moist because of the molasses. Is it something like that where they have to like scoop it up? Because if it's as fine as frost on the ground, then I can't. It's hard for me to imagine that it's something solid that you can pick up.
Well, I mean, they can probably. I think of it like snow, where it's solid if you ball it up.
That's a good point. So it would fall on the ground. It was fine like frost, but it was of such an accumulation that you could like scoop it,
Yeah.
or maybe even scrape it onto something. Because it would have to be, because anyone who's ever collected snow for the purpose of obviously making snow cones,
Yeah.
knows that you can't just scrape it off the ground because you get the dirt in it. You have to find a good pile of snow, and kind of scrape it off the top of the freshly fallen snow.
I mean, not always. Remember when I was trying to throw snowballs at you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that snow was not that deep. I just skimmed it lightly.
Mm-hmm,
So I think it could have been a light skimming.
The interesting thing here is the text is going through painful lengths to describe the manna process. And I think just because so many people had questions about it, right? And the timing here is so specific. If you're not an early morning person, you're not going to like this manna system. Because it says, when the layer of dew lifted there on the surface of the wilderness was defined. And so as the morning sun was first rising, and it was just hitting the morning surface enough to evaporate the moisture, then the manna would appear, I assume, in a thick layer. And then it says later on, which we haven't got to yet, that when the sun gets overhead and actually it'll melt.
Yeah.
Which means that you got a pretty precise window for going out there and collecting the manna. You got to hit that window or you're not going to eat for the day.
There's enough people out there that I'm sure a bunch of people could just be designated as manna gatherers, right?
Well, it does seem that way. Like there was somebody from each household that collected it for their household, which we'll get to that in the next couple verses. It'll actually mention that.
Just get a big shovel,
right,
and start scooping it up.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's pretty darn close to what we're getting at. Let's read 15 and 16.
All right,
and then we'll talk about that.
All right. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" But they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." So an alternate version of verse 15 is where they did know what it was, but wanted to annoy Moses, so they asked anyhow.
Pretty much.
So, it's weird, right? They're like, of course they didn't know what it was. That's why they said, "What is it?"
Right. And it certainly couldn't be bread because it seems to be like a scoopable powder, which makes a lot more sense with the rest of the chapter. Because the measurements that are used,
oh yeah, right,
are measurements that you would get for like a grain or a barley grain or even a flour.
Well, then maybe that's what it was.
That's what I'm thinking.
And then like they baked it or something.
Yes, exactly. That's okay. So I'm glad you hit on this, because as I'm reading the chapter, I'm thinking, oh, this is like a cooking product. This is not, you're not collecting this and then just eating it. I think you're actually collecting it and cooking it. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. I thought you were just shoveling it in your mouth like it was snow.
I mean, I wonder if they tried that, because theoretically it tastes good. And depending on how fine it is, you can make a cereal from it. But it says it's as fine as the mist. So
it'd be like eating a bag of flour, maybe.
Right. If it was so fine, if it was as fine as like a mist or dew, or, as it says, then, or fine as frost, if that was the case, it really, to me, sounds like a flour. And that we're going to make more sense of that as we get into the next couple of verses, because we just read verse 16, and it does say, gather as much of it as you needs. Which that can't be right. Each of you needs. There we go.
Oh,
I missed the word. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer per person, which is typically a measurement.
I don't think we did 16 yet.
Oh, sorry. Did I skip ahead?
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm sorry. Should we do you have comments on 14 and 15 before I ruin it with verse 16?
No. Well, yes.
Go ahead. Let's read the notes.
uh,
Sorry.
all right.
I got
So
excited.
I was just saying. So, oh wait, what? It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. And so I said, so it is bread. And I was like, don't we always think of this as falling from the sky and not being weird little bread flowers or bread snow or something?
Right. Well, that's what people throughout church history have kind of described it as is bread like. But we'll see elsewhere in the Bible sometimes when bread is referred to,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's actually the way it's described is referring to the flour used to make bread. And it's hard to catch sometimes. And I think that gives us more credence to interpreting this passage to really be about a grain product used for cooking, not as much like a finished product like a loaf of bread or a wafer.
So this is a miracle, right?
It seems to be.
Do you know how he might have done it? Like, with like earthen laws of the universe.
Well, if we can conclude that it was a grain, not as fine as frost, but like an actual grain, like a wheat grain or a barley grain type of
Mhm.
size. If we can make that conclusion, which I don't know if we can, but if we could, well then your berries on the wind theory are quite plausible. I mean, grain flies on the wind pretty easily, especially compared to berries. Seems a little bit impractical that God is just going to cause a wind every morning at the same day and blow in grain from random locations over the world. I don't know where they're getting enough grain and why nobody is commenting on a flow of grain in the wind every day for 40 years.
Uh-huh.
But, if you want a naturalistic explanation for it, your wind will be as good as any.
It's always the wind, isn't it?
Seems to always be the wind.
It's crazy.
Right. The wind is God, apparently.
Mhm,
You can't
mhm.
see it or touch it. You just know it's there.
Look at you.
Except you can touch it, wind, realistically. You can feel it.
Yeah, but not really.
You can just put your hand out the window
I
and
know it's invisible.
pretty much feel it. You can put it into a canister and pressurize it, and you can get it, you can see it when it gets cold enough. You just breathe and you can see the wind. 'Cause, it
I don't think
it crystallizes, the moisture crystallizes.
I don't think you're breathing out wind.
Yeah.
No, that's carbon dioxide, isn't it?
Well, it's a mixture of things.
Yeah, who knows? All right.
Right. Anyways.
Oh,
So in Omer, as we were saying, in Omer.
Oh, we didn't read that yet.
Oh, yeah, we got to read. Well, go ahead, sorry, read 16.
All right. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is together as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent.
Right.
All right. I got a lot to say. Don't worry.
Well, are you going to read the whole verse?
What?
Oh, you already did.
Yeah, that was it.
Sorry.
It's just the one verse.
I don't know what I was thinking.
So I know this is a bit of a spoiler for verse 36, but I just have to add it for clarity. So apparently 1 omer is equal to 1/10 of an ephah.
Yep.
So I hope that clears everything up. In reality, however, the computer says that 1 omer would be about 2 loaves of bread.
Yes.
With leaven, or a shoebox of bread if unleavened. I don't know why the computer went with shoeboxes for the unleavened bread.
It is kind of a weird
but whatever
measurement. Yeah.
So yeah.
But to be fair, in omer was a common measurement for grains, especially corn.
Apparently, it was just in the Bible, though.
Yeah, it's not something that we see a lot of outside of the Bible.
Isn't that weird? Because
Well,
I mean, like it was just a biblical measurement.
Well, I'm sure it was a measurement that was native to the Israelites. It's not as ubiquitous as like a cubit.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's a joke, right? Because that's not really ubiquitous, right?
No, it is. Everybody in ancient years knew what a cubit was.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah.
Oh.
But that being said, there's one more thing here that the astute reader might notice.
So I didn't notice. Okay.
But only if you know the rest of the Bible. It says an omer per person. And as you said, it looks like one person is coordinating what's happening here. And as you did your research, it says one omer is equal to 1/10 of an ephah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as it turns out, 1/10 of an ephah is an interesting measurement because it shows up again in Leviticus 5. I think verse 11 or 12. There we go. This is laws regarding the sin sacrifices in the Levitical law, which we'll be reading very soon, actually.
Yeah, right.
Is
Another year.
if you cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, you shall bring as your offering for the sin that you have committed 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for purification offering.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that as they're in the desert, I don't know, possibly grumbling and sinning,
Mm-hmm.
that God says that you can collect 1/10 of an ephah of manna.
So what you would normally eat for a day.
Yeah.
So you're sacrificing your food for the day, right?
Yeah, your daily allotment. Just an interesting connection. It might, listen, it could mean absolutely nothing.
It's literally obviously connected.
It just seems interesting.
No. It's connected in every way possible.
Just saying.
No, it is.
It's a point of connection.
No, I'm saying it is a connection.
I believe you.
Then we're agreeing.
We are in agreement.
I mean, God is basically saying if you sinned, but you want to, absolve yourself, just have a fast for the day. And I mean, that makes perfect sense, right?
Well, he's not saying that you can't eat that day because you're going to eat that day. It's just that you have to give up one day's portion.
That's what I just said. So you wouldn't eat that day.
No, you would still eat that day.
Well, you'd eat the quail.
Well, are you talking about Exodus or Leviticus?
Both.
There's no sin sacrifice in Exodus yet.
Well, okay. Wait, what? Is Leviticus when they're doing the 40 years deal?
It comes a little bit later. But to be quite honest,
Mm-hmm.
if in fact the laws in Leviticus were given on Mount Sinai during the 40-year period,
Mm-hmm.
if that were the case, then that would mean that you would be giving up your daily allotment of food.
Yeah.
In terms of your bread, but not your quail. You can still eat the quail, right? But here's the funny thing, okay? And I kind of knew we would get here eventually once we brought Leviticus into the mix. All the laws in Leviticus assume that they have food sources. They have animals and turtle doves and cattle and goats and things like that. Which means, if these laws are being practiced while they're in the desert for 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of weird that the Bible would say that God did the manna and quail for 40 years. Theoretically, that's all they had to eat for the 40 years was the manna and the quail.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, you would expect that all of the sacrificial laws would have taken that into account, unless God said, listen, you don't have to do any of these now. You do all of these sacrificial laws later. But we already know that when the tabernacle is set up in Exodus, the sacrifices commence, as would be expected.
And is that during their 40 years?
Yep. So if they have animals to slaughter and barbecue and sacrifice, I don't know what they need the man and the quail for.
Well, I mean, my guess is they have animals to sacrifice.
A lot.
Well, but not enough to eat.
Many thousands.
What? Why are there a lot of sacrifices?
There's a lot of sacrifices. It's an endless barbecue.
Why?
Because that's what God wants.
Why don't they just sacrifice the quail?
Dude, can you imagine if God gave them all these quails and then it came time to sacrifice and we're like, we're just gonna give you the quail back. We didn't want the quail to begin with.
Mm.
That'd be crazy. He'd be so upset. But the long and short of it is though, it's a weird thing that they would need the manna and quail for the 40 years, and then at the same time, God is like, "Give me all your cattle." It's a weird situation.
Well, maybe they did have a lot of cattle, and God wanted it so that they would be more reliant on the quail.
Right. Perhaps. I could see it.
Did I just blow that wide open?
I don't know, because usually during the sacrificial process, the people that are bringing the sacrifices participate in eating the sacrifices.
Well, were they sacrificing every day?
Yeah.
Every day?
Not every individual every day.
Well, there you go. Well, how many? Okay, if there are, say, 200,000 people there, every day, how many sacrifices happen?
Hundreds.
Just hundreds? That's not a lot. How's that going to feed 200,000 people?
Well, it feeds the priests pretty well.
Yeah, but there aren't 200,000 priests.
I'm saying if you have the cattle to execute them,
Mm-hmm.
you've got meat to eat.
Well, I mean, you have an amount. Maybe it's just enough to feed the priests.
Maybe.
All right. I think we're going to agree on my thing I said.
All right.
I know agreeing with me is a bit of a slippery slope. I get that.
It can be. I try not to feed the bear when it can be helped.
Uh-huh.
But nevertheless, let's carry on. What do come up next? 17 and 18?
I believe so.
Right.
Maybe. No, yeah. No, 19. We're doing 19 now.
We didn't do 17 18 yet?
We did. No, we didn't. Let's do 17 and 18.
Right.
All right. The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. The Israelites, but when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. So they weighed 2.5 million Israelites as bread. I mean, even 200,000 would be a lot.
Yeah, so this is the interesting thing.
Or 20K.
Right.
Here's the question. Why do they feel a need to weigh it? Just make sure no one took like a huge amount, I mean, eyeball it. Like, hey, that guy's filling his wheelbarrow. I think he's got too much, right?
So this is the thing.
It already says some people took more and some took less, right? They just wanted it to average out.
More or less for their household. They're saying some people took a bunch and some people didn't take a bunch, but when they measured it, it came out to what it was supposed to be for their household. I think that's implied.
It's implied now that you told me, which means it wasn't implied, but yeah.
But here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's important. I think your observation initially is way more important for this discussion.
Okay.
Which is, however many people out there, if it's 200 or 400,000 people or 2.5 million, why are they going through all the trouble of weighing all this?
Especially since it's all maggoty anyhow.
Did every household have a scale?
No, I mean, no. It must have been in public somewhere.
Right. Like, how are the logistics working out here?
Yeah.
With this entire mass of people having to go through the daily process.
Yeah.
Not only of collecting the manna, but then figuring out, okay, well, I got to go get it weighed now. Holy smokes, is that tedious? You think God would just have like an honor system there at least? But no, like you got to weigh this thing out.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't even matter, right?
What happened if someone collected too much?
Literally nothing.
It just went bad.
Right.
So if that was the case, if you collected too much and it just went bad, then why are you weighing it? It all works out in the end.
Yeah, he just didn't want people eating a huge amount.
Or what if it was this? What if some people weighed it and some people didn't because they realized that it would go bad and it would turn to worms and whatnot, and they're like, yeah, I don't like this idea at all. I'm just gonna weigh out exactly what it's supposed to be and not have to mess with the worms. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's pretty gross.
How precise? Okay. How precise is the measurement? If you're 1 ounce over, Is that 1 ounce gonna turn to waste?
So if you have just 1 ounce over, can't somebody just eat it?
I'm almost there.
Oh, okay.
If you're 1 ounce over, does it turn to waste?
If you don't eat it.
Like, what's the gray area? Where's the percentage of error here?
I don't know. I don't think it matters.
Okay. Let's imagine for a second that somebody does go over. Let's say they collect, 2/10 of an ephah,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then let's say, okay, all right. Let's say they eat it.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've got too much.
I think you're doing what I'm about to talk about later.
I didn't read your notes, but
Uh,
if they collect too much, which you're not supposed to do, and the extra turns to worms,
in their stomach.
but and they eat it.
I mentioned that. That's so funny.
I'm glad you did, because how could you not think of it when you're reading the passage, right? Okay, so if that's the case, okay. If it is the case that it turns the worms in their stomach,
Mm-hmm.
then that's crazy.
Right.
Okay. If it's the case that it doesn't turn the worms in their stomach, then it's just a loophole. What's stopping them from taking more than they need and eating it? As long as they eat all of it.
I don't know if that's even an issue. You know what I mean? Do they really need to only have as much as some amount?
Well,
like, why can't they eat a bunch more than they need to survive? That's my question.
Because they're supposed to depend on God every single day.
Yeah, but they
for
would
the
still,
daily bread.
Yeah, but they would still be depending on Him every day.
But He gave you measurements.
I mean, I'm just saying. Yes, I get that, but
I said this is how much you need. You know,
but surely some people need to eat more than others, right?
But you can have as much quail as you want.
Well, there you go. I bet the quail's pretty good. So.
You know what I mean?
I guess that's true. Well, then I have no idea.
It says, let's see. It was flaky substance, as fine as frost. Israelites, they did not know. Yeah, yeah. This is what gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person.
So maybe it was just as much as people need, and it averaged out to an omer.
Roughly an omer.
So nobody really had to. It was just apparently that's how much people normally eat. It was just a coincidence.
But if somebody ate more, okay, and it didn't turn to worms in their stomach, which I can't imagine that's what's happening.
That would be weird. A lot of stomach aches and
then
weird vomit.
You're basically just telling them that they can collect as much as they want, because there's no penalty for eating too much.
Why should there be a penalty? That's what I'm not understanding.
Well, I'm just saying there's no point in having them measure anything. The measurement is meaningless.
Well, are they measuring things?
Yes, an omer to a person.
Yeah, I don't know.
So what's the point? And we just read that they're measuring it.
Yeah.
So if they're measuring this stuff out, that means the measurement must be important. But if in fact they get way too much and they end up eating it and it doesn't turn to worm in their stomachs, and that means technically it's all the weighing process is a meaningless process.
So what you're trying to say is the only logical explanation is that it does turn to worms.
That kind of seems like if you're going to keep them honest,
we figured it out.
You got to get stomach worms.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the logical conclusion here, isn't it?
Very logical.
Am I crazy?
Well, yes. But I think that's all we can
say. I didn't give the punishment. God's the one that gave the punishment. Okay.
I wonder how many people vomiting did it take for them to go, you know what? Might be related.
Could you imagine the intestinal damage? All those worms?
Wouldn't be good.
And we didn't bring it up earlier either, but the logistics of the quail.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have mentioned it later, but before we read the next section, like the logistics of enough quail showing up every evening for a couple 100,000 people. That's a lot of quail, and you don't eat all the quail. You throw the bones out, throw the feathers out. At some point in time, you've got to do some waste management. what do you do with all that? Right?
Well,
Are they just going to incinerate it on the fire?
I'm thinking. Can you incinerate bones?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you can because that's how cremation works, but I don't know.
Maybe you can just throw it in that big pillar of fire that God made.
That's what the fire was for. The fire was for the garbage patrol. I mean, that's a genius solution.
You figured it out. I'm proud of us.
I love it. Okay, that's a good one.
Here's another question, though.
Right.
All right, so let's say they didn't actually throw it in the fires of God. And they didn't eat them either because you don't really eat bones. Now, shouldn't there be a bunch of bones like in the ground? Quail bones all over the place? Is there? You know what I'm talking about?
There's not, but there theoretically should be something. We should find some remains. Some of it would be, decomposed or processed, but certainly not all of it, especially in the dry desert regions. Yeah, you would expect something to be there because we find pig bones all the time.
Oh,
Yeah,
well then maybe you should find some quail.
you would think so.
Well, maybe
You think you'd find a lot of quail?
maybe all the stuff they don't eat disappears, just like the manna.
Oh, well, I think it does
too.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the text is
Oh, okay.
anything that's not eaten is gone. Well, it's going to say that in like the next two verses.
That's probably a good idea, or else you'd have like bags upon bags of bones.
Well, it makes sense. Let's read it. I think we're in verse 19.
Maybe.
Let's do 19 through 21.
All right. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them.
Do 21 as well.
Each morning everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away.
Yeah, so it seems pretty clear to me that whatever they didn't use would either be burned up by the sun or would rot away into maggots.
So they had to use it or eat it before the sun came out, I guess.
Yeah, but there's one important factor.
I think I know what you're gonna say.
I don't know what you're gonna say, but what were they doing with all the worms?
Well, I don't know.
Well, remember we talked about the quail bones.
Maybe they disappeared at the end
and
too.
the disposing of the quail bones. That being the case, well, they need to do something with if there's a bunch of food that's been collected that turned to worms. You got to deal with that somehow, right? Does that pile up over time, or do you think it only happens like once, and then the people in the house are like, well, "We're not going to do that again"?
Well, probably. Yeah. I mean, they're not. Nobody wants maggots everywhere.
Right. That's a good point. You certainly wouldn't make that mistake more than once,
No.
especially if you got stomach maggots.
I wouldn't even make it once.
Yeah.
Stomach maggots. That's gross.
That's some food poisoning that you never dreamed of.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
I thought we were gonna say that it was actually snow bread, so I guess we weren't on the same page there.
Fair enough. Yeah. What do you have in your notes there?
You don't see bread melting that often. I'll say that one.
Well, see, that was the thing we were discussing earlier about what the manna was, because this is where it gets weird.
I mean, grain doesn't melt. Right?
Exactly.
So what was it then?
It seemed to be, a lot of people seem to have associated it with the morning dew, but we already read that it doesn't come out until the morning dew's kind of been cleared up.
Okay.
So it's weird to me that if it's not moist, there's no moisture in it. Why would the sun be drying it up? And I couldn't come up with a good answer for this.
Until
that's it. I don't have a good answer for it. I don't know why the sun would cause it to burn up unless it just had some.
You said burn up. Well, it says melt.
Melt.
I mean, burn up would make sense.
Sure, but To be fair, a lot of things melt in the Bible that aren't actually combustible by fire. Like things are melted by fire in the Bible that like talk about the mountains melting. So the word melt could definitely refer to things even figuratively that don't necessarily combust.
Oh, so it might not be snow bread.
Right.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right.
Hmm.
It might be a gelatinous type substance that when exposed to heat turns more liquid and just bleh,
Well, I'm sorry. Can't grain burn up?
it can burn up, but it could read here that when the sun grew hot it burns up like flash paper.
Maybe that's what they just said.
Maybe.
It melted.
Yeah, I mean,
Is there any type of grain that burns up when the sun comes out? I don't feel like there would be because it wouldn't last very long.
right.
You know?
Yeah. It could just be a special property of this particular type of grain.
Nope.
Why?
Well, because we have to root it in reality somehow.
Why?
They said so.
Literally none of this is rooted in reality. It's God doing miracles.
Well, agree to disagree.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyways, we don't really know why it's melting or burning up when the sun comes out, but
Well, now I think it has to be burning because of the sun.
sure.
Because I thought it might be snow bread, but now I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think it's snow bread. But maybe
The last we know, it's bread.
maybe we'll look into this a little bit more
Do it right
between this
down.
week and next week as to if there's any good modern commentary on what it could be compared to. But for now, let's read through 22 and 23.
I should have been asking the computer this stuff too.
Sure, yeah.
I'll try to remember to do it next time.
Mm-hmm.
On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning." Why would you boil bread? That's weird, right?
No, they're not boiling the bread. They're boiling the quail.
No, it's the bread. They said bread.
So on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food.
Yeah, it says 2 omers.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And you don't weigh the quail. You don't weigh the quail.
That's a very fair point. My brain immediately went to quail when I was reading this, and I think I was wrong there. Interesting. Although it still could be if 23 is a general statement. It said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is the day of rest. Lord, the Lord, bake what you want," which is obviously the bread from the manna.
Yeah.
"And boil what you want." I assume that's referring to the quail, and all that's left over put aside because they're going to eat quail on the Sabbath. They're not going to eat just the manna on the Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
So my understanding here is that he is referring to both the manna and the quail that you need to set it aside for the Sabbath day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how I'm reading it.
So you're appealing to authority in a way.
I am absolutely not appealing to authority. That's not how that logical fallacy is used.
Yeah. I'll get it right, huh?
I know. At least you know what it is, even if
Yeah.
you don't know how to use it yet.
Well, yes. All right.
An appeal to authority is when you claim that your argument is valid only because somebody in a position of authority agrees with you.
And that really kind of just begs the question, doesn't it?
That's not what begging the question means.
Wow.
Begging question is when the logical premise to support your conclusion is in fact the conclusion. Circular in nature. Anyways, let's just continue reading then.
Okay.
Let's do 24 through 26.
All right. So they saved it until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because it is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any heat." Didn't it mention a lot earlier that they were supposed to do this? And it didn't mention why, right? But then it did, and now they're mentioning it again.
What? About the maggots and the...
No, about the Sabbath. Because it already said a lot earlier that just, can you scroll up like a bunch?
Yeah, we can just do a control F on it though.
Either way is fine. All right, keep scrolling.
Verse 23
Keep
mentions the
scrolling.
Sabbath.
Keep scrolling.
That's it.
Well, then I said keep scrolling.
That's all there is.
Well, then hold on.
Verse 23 is the first mention of it.
Well, then probably it was. They didn't say this. Remember when here? Can I get the remote, the mouse?
Sure. No, it won't reach that far.
Then just show me my notes.
Okay.
Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
Uh-huh.
Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Going.
Yeah.
No, I mean keep going.
Yep, sure.
Mm-hmm. There, number 5. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other 2 days.
Oh, yeah.
So they already mentioned this stuff.
Yeah, they just didn't mention why.
Why do you think they mentioned why when they initially did it? They just didn't mention it in the Bible? You know what I mean?
I mean, maybe.
Well, I'm just saying, why did they wait till the end to say it was the Sabbath?
Well, though
they had already been doing
this is a conversation that God is having with Moses. In verse 5, it's a conversation that God is having with Moses, right? God is telling him on the 6th day, this is what you do.
Okay.
Later, we've got the instructions from Moses. It says, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. So Moses is recounting the conversation.
So maybe this was just a week's time?
What?
Just a week's time? And Moses is like,
What are you
okay,
talking about?
now it's Friday. I better tell them the thing that God told me to tell them.
Well, I assume so. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as they had the instructions.
Matters to me.
I suppose
What if
so.
they went and it was a Saturday and Moses hadn't told them? What would have happened?
Well, he did tell them.
I know, but maybe, well, that's what I'm saying. So it had to have been just a week. This whole thing happened within a week's time.
Well, I don't know, but I mean,
No, it did.
Fair enough. Does it matter?
No.
Oh.
But I'm just saying, if at the beginning they're saying, okay, this is something you got to do on the Sabbath. And then much later on, Moses is like, okay, now I need to tell them what they got to do on the Sabbath. That means that whole chunk of time was just a week.
Fair enough.
That was it.
Yeah. No problem there.
All right.
Okay.
Well, it's not often that you can actually figure out how many days have gone by.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit difficult, actually, during Exodus narrative to see how much time has elapsed.
Right. And this was only 1 day, or 1 week, and I think that's interesting.
I think that's pretty solid.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's read 27 through 29.
All right. On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. The Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day?
Yeah, Sabbath.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I said. Whatever. You got anything to add?
Well, I thought this was a curious passage because where else in the Bible do you find a lot of instructions on what specifically you should or shouldn't do on the Sabbath?
In Genesis.
No.
In Leviticus. Deuteronomy. The New Testament. Later on in Exodus that we haven't read yet. Numbers. Kings. Judges. Samuel.
The Torah says to do no work on the Sabbath.
All right. So did I get it right or no?
Which is poorly defined.
Yeah.
But this is interesting. I think this makes it simpler because when someone say don't do any work on the Sabbath, that's not a super precise wording. What is work? You know what I mean? However, this is really precise. It says not to leave your dwelling.
Yeah.
You know what that means.
Yeah, I guess you're right about that.
The only other question, if we've narrowed it down to don't even leave your dwelling.
Yes.
What can you and can you not do in your dwelling? Can you make your bed?
Well, it's a very interesting question,
Yeah.
and I have a few answers to that.
Let's have it.
All right. So, I was thinking, what do they do? Just chillax in a hot ass tent all day? What's the equivalent of Netflix and chill back then?
I don't know.
Well, why don't we find out?
Oh, you went into this, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
So did you Google Netflix and chill in the ancient Near East?
No, I had the computer do all this for me.
Fair enough. What do you come up with?
All right, so we're like David Letterman here.
Oh, you're David Letterman.
Well, we can.
What's
yeah.
David Letterman's sidekick name? Didn't he have a sidekick?
Paul Schaefer.
So I'm Paul and you're David.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So the top 10 ancient biblical Jewish equivalents to the modern day phrase Netflix and chill.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Number 10, stare at the clouds and argue about whether they're God or not.
Fair enough.
Number 9.
From inside the tent?
What?
Inside the tent?
You can cut a hole in it.
Fair. Okay, sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Number 9, pretend the golden calf never happened and chill.
Well, it didn't happen yet.
You're a very bad Paul Schaefer.
I'm so
I
sorry.
want you to know that. You're just
I'm supposed to be supporting your dreams.
No, just playing on your keyboard.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I got a Casio somewhere, maybe.
All right. Number 8, complain about Moses.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen, actually.
Number 7, whittle and talk about who God smote today.
Oh, that's a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Like a barbershop, just.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Number 6, trade sandals for the day.
I do not want someone else's feet touching my feet.
Number 5, swap Red Sea stories and cuddle.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Scuttle and cuddle.
Maybe.
They scuttled across the Red Sea.
Oh, that's clever. Yeah.
Scuttle and cuddle.
Like a lobster.
Yeah.
All right. Number 4, roast quail and talk about the promised land.
I thought these were going to rhyme for some reason. Or I thought they were going to be catchy. Apparently, didn't understand the premise of this.
I didn't take that long to write this.
Apparently not.
You know what?
I don't even think you made these up. You chat GTP these, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I had to pick the funniest ones.
Fair enough.
There were a lot that were even less funny than this.
But I believe you.
All right. Number 3, sip from water from the rock and stargaze.
Okay.
Number 2, sit in the tent and watch the fire. And number 1, a vibe by the ark that they don't have yet.
They killed all their ancestors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? No. The Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, that ark. You should have said that.
Well, we were talking about Exodus. I assumed it was obvious.
You could have said park by the ark.
Well, but vibe has such a different vibe to it.
All right.
Anyhow,
fair enough.
I worked really not that hard on it, but I wrote them down. I mean, I copied and pasted.
Yeah, you didn't even write them down, did you? I've never seen you use bullet points before.
Uh-huh.
Oh boy. All right. Well, with that,
well, the computer says nothing sets a good mood like a miracle. That doesn't sound right. The computer never sets a mood like. You know what? You scrolled and now I can't read it.
Oh, you got more jokes in here.
Well, just the one.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize
that.
The
computer says nothing sets the mood like a good miracle. There.
Sure.
All right.
Speaking of setting the mood, do you think they had pickup lines like,
You got one. You got one?
I hate to say it, but you could say something like, "Hey, you want to be my Red Sea, and I'll be the Israelites."
Oh.
Part the.
Oh.
Spread the.
Oh, don't say such things.
We're
about to get shadow banned.
We are already shadow banned. Oh. We've been shadow banned for a year after we did an episode on rape.
That's true.
So that's pretty much a done deal at this point.
Okay.
All right, so
we got to think of some funny pickup lines.
It actually is pretty wild how that system works. Because our videos were popping off.
Yeah.
And then we had one episode about rape, and now, anyways, that's neither. Maybe we're just not entertaining though, which is much more likely.
No,
I suspect we're just terrible to listen to.
Oh yeah, what about the 2 concurrent viewers? Huh?
I guarantee they're blood related to somebody that knows us or married to one of us.
Yeah, I was like, my wife is not blood related to me. Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah. But nevertheless, should we actually read the passage 27 through 29?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Wait, we already read that.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Some of the people went out to gather and they found none of, obviously. Is it okay? This goes back to what we were talking about communication prior. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay. It seems like they're idiots.
Right.
Because when you first read it, you think, well, maybe some people didn't get the word. Maybe the communication chain broke down, and they're like, "Oh, do I go out and click some,
Right.
some today? I don't know."
Yeah.
But then God's pissed off. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions?" So clearly, God knows that they're being disobedient, but it's kind of a weird form of disobedience where they seem to all they did was walk out of their tent and be like, "Is there manna here today?"
Yeah.
And then they walked back in. They're like, "Oops, my bad. I forgot."
Right.
I was just checking.
Mm.
It's just kind of weird that was the thing that set God off here.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I get it when you give very clear, easy instructions and people don't even listen to them. I get how that would be frustrating.
Right.
But it is kind of a weird thing to get mad at. I would be more mad at like the people who were like collecting way too much, and then like, oh, I can't let it go. I can't let it be worms. I better scarf it all down.
Right.
I eat 3 days worth. Then the people who just casually walked outside thinking, oh, is there manna today? You know what I mean?
Right. I get that.
And anyways, it's wild. The whole thing's wild. Let's read. There's a bunch of verses here in this paragraph. Do 30 and 31.
Okay. So the people rested on the seventh day. The Israelites called it manna. It was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. I had chicken last night, and I dipped it in honey, and it was good.
Oh.
So I bet dipping quail in honey is pretty similar.
Well, see, that was the thing, and we kind of briefly mentioned it earlier, but I could only assume, and by the way, this is a coriander seed. It's not as small as like the morning mist or whatever it was, like frost. Yeah, it's not as fine as the frost, as the Bible says.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this pretty well confirms that what we're seeing here is that it was probably related to a grain of sorts that needed to be baked into bread.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can safely assume that they were not already pre-made wafers or bread to eat. That something needed to be cooked here.
All right. Do we have any type of grain that tastes like it was made with honey?
Honey oat bread, honey wheat bread. You ever have honey wheat bread?
Did they put honey in it?
They sweeten it. They probably used to put honey in it. I've had honey bread before.
Well, you're not allowed to put honey in it.
I've had bread with honey.
It says it tastes like wafers made with honey.
Okay.
So it doesn't say that they added honey to it.
No, I don't think they did.
Right. So do we have a grain that tastes like wafers with honey?
I've never heard of one.
Okay. Well, then we need to look into that.
I mean, ChatGPT it.
Well, I mean, we're live.
I mean, after, obviously.
Oh, I knew that.
Not that you've never ChatGPT'd in the middle of our session.
Never.
But here's the thing. The chapter is giving us mixed message. Is it like a seed or is it like a powder? Just which one?
I mean, it can be both.
Just make up your mind here.
No, it can be both. I'll tell you why. Because you get a bunch of seeds, it probably feels like a powder. They were probably just exaggerating to make it seem like it was even more whatever, Maybe they don't even know what a powder is like back then,
Right.
Did they have flour?
Yeah.
Was it as...
It wasn't as fine as modern flour, obviously.
Well, so maybe they didn't know what fine actually meant. Maybe we're the ones who were thinking about it wrong because we're thinking, oh, it's just like the flour we have now.
They did have fine flour, but it wasn't nothing compared to modern technique.
I wonder how fine it was then.
I don't know.
Was it still gritty, grainy, like sand? Or
I mean, you can find some stone ground flour.
oh,
Like you can still buy it actually. It's it's more akin to like a cornbread flour. If
and
you've
they're
ever seen
and they're
that.
saying that counted as your frosty,
Fair enough, yeah.
which means if the seeds were a little smaller, I don't know.
I'm just saying, it's hard to know if we're really talking about a seed or a flower or somewhere in between. But one thing we know for sure is it was something that still needed to be put into a recipe and cooked.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to the final thing I'm going to say on the manna thing
Mm-hmm.
is they ate it for 40 years. You know they had recipe books.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that not one recipe book survived all of Israelite history of like, hey, we got all this manna and quail. I know you've been tired of eating it every day for 40 years. So here's some good recipes to spice things up.
Well, what else do they have?
Oh, they could have put the wind berries in it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, according to your theory, the wind's already bringing in all the manna and or the quail or whatever. So
I mean,
why not have some wind berries?
I mean, God would have to decide that he wanted them to have berries. So, they could just go back to Egypt and scoop them up.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of spices out there, but they could get salt water and make salt.
Well, there you go. They probably did not need a cookbook then.
Right. Actually, if you bake your bread using salt water, would that be over or under salted? Hard to know how much salt to put in a bread,
I guess I'm sure they figured it out by trial and error pretty soon.
Right. Yeah. I'd be curious to know if anyone's made saltwater bread. In fact, if you're watching this, I don't know, because 10 people watch these shows, but listen, if you're watching this and you've ever made saltwater bread, I want to hear about it because I'm deeply curious.
So they used whatever this was to make bread.
Right.
Do we need other ingredients to make bread?
Typically leaven, but you don't have to.
Okay, so we're not using leaven. So can you make bread out of just flour?
Yeah, water, flour, and salt.
Really?
I mean, theoretically, you typically would want to add like baking soda, baking powder, but I assume they didn't have those things. So
I don't know what those are even for. So
you can do yeast cakes, not yeast cake. I mean, flour cakes.
Mm-hmm.
You can do flatbreads, or you can make wafers. So there's a couple of things you could do there.
Okay, so I mean, if for the first 10 years or so they were getting tired of wafers, they could change it up. Yeah, they're doing all right. I don't know. I keep thinking of that quail. I'm like, this quail's like a bird, I think.
Sure.
And I like chicken.
Yeah, it's like a fat chicken with different feathers.
So maybe it would taste good.
I think the quail's got the thing on top of their head too, doesn't it?
Oh, does it?
The thing.
Yeah, the thing. Yeah.
The dangler. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
You've seen quail before, right?
Yes. Yeah, isn't that what all the rich people hunted back in the day?
Yeah, I thought so actually. That's what I'm talking about. You see the dangler.
Yeah, it's a dangler.
What is that thing? Why is it there? What's it doing?
I don't know.
It's the craziest looking bird. Anyways,
I'm just saying I'd eat one of them.
I'd try it. Let's read. You just did 30 and 31. Let's do 32 here.
All right. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded: take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt." And of course, that is in the Ark of the Covenant,
which we don't have anymore, which is a little problematic. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant yet.
Well, obviously, we'll get to that, okay?
Right, but the instruction itself is kind of weird because it says, take a jar and put an omer of manna in it and place it before the Lord and keep it through your generations. And place it before the covenant. Now, some translations do actually say the Ark of the Covenant rather
Okay.
than covenant.
Okay.
The word here in Hebrew does get used to refer to the Ark of the Covenant. The typical word for ark is Aaron, which we mentioned previously, being ironic because Aaron, the first priest, basically has the same name as the word for the ark. But the long and short of it is they don't know anything about an ark yet. It's kind of a weird thing for them to instruct them to do. It just seems anachronistic here.
Well, well, you're talking about the tablets of the covenant law, right?
Right, because there's no covenant yet. There's no tablets, there's no covenant, there's no ark.
Okay. I was just thinking maybe this was like a precursor to the Ark of the Covenant, you know? Like maybe it was a cardboard box or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we're not told of anything yet. It's possible, as we've said before, that part of the narrative is actually just missing. We've seen that, right? It's certainly possible that there was something that was given, some sort of instruction or item given that we're just not told about.
Yeah. Let me ask you a dumb question. Can flour go bad?
Yeah, but it takes a long time and
How long?
moisture. Well, and going bad is a kind of an odd thing to say too, because sometimes, like, if you have a bag of flour, even if it doesn't necessarily go bad, it does taste funny after a while. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But being that they're in the desert,
Mm-hmm.
you can keep it for a long time.
How long?
I don't know,
We'll take a guess.
at least a year.
Oh, a whole year. Ooh. See, I was thinking that maybe like if you had some of this and it was in the Ark of the Covenant, it might have unnatural qualities, did not decompose. Right?
Sure.
Because that was the idea, is that they were decomposing at the end of every day, right? Melting or what have you.
Right, yeah, except for this one jar.
Right, yeah. So I was just I was just wondering how impressive that would be to find that jar.
Be very impressive.
Like the Holy Grail.
That'd be way more impressive than the ark itself.
I mean, the Holy Grail grants. Wait, what does the Holy Grail grant?
Nothing.
Immortality, maybe?
Not in the Bible.
Anyhow, this is what we call extra biblical
Fan fiction.
It's called Indiana Jones, isn't it?
That's what it is.
But I'm just saying, I wonder if we could do tests on the manna to see how it doesn't decompose. I mean, it's not a very impressive miracle, but maybe it would have lasting ramifications all throughout the world for how people store food, you know?
I mean,
I'm just saying, I'm surprised there hasn't been a movie about this. Indiana Jones and the manna ark food.
what if they broke it down and found the molecular structure of the manna flour and learned to reproduce it? Then they could feed the world on non-expiring food.
Yes.
Called the Manna Project.
That's what I said, but you said it better.
Then the one world government would take over and give everyone the mark of the beast.
Something like that. But yeah, I was just thinking about that, you know? That would be cool. A cool Indiana Jones movie, you know?
I'd watch it.
Yeah.
Well,
it's got to be a big jar, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, it's funny because I was just thinking about how, like, when I originally read this, I was thinking of I wasn't thinking of it like flour. So I was thinking they were just shoving 2 loaves of bread in a jar and screwing it on, you know?
Could you imagine? Shoving loaves of bread into a jar. It'd be a big jar, I suppose. It'd be a big clay pot or something. You could do that.
You smush it down in there and
right.
See, this is what God made.
Right.
Yeah.
You can preserve things pretty well for a long time period in the desert in clay jars, though. That's how we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. People around the Dead Sea found them, but they had been stored for 1900 years and because of the low moisture levels,
Mm.
and that a lot of them were in jars that were protected from the environment. Um, it's a phenomenal time for a text to be preserved that's not on stone or tablet.
So, like a loaf of bread could be preserved that long.
Without expiring?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you could eat it.
No,
You just shouldn't.
no, you would die. Can't eat a bread 2,000 years old. You're dead.
All right, never mind.
But again, if it's God bread,
Right.
God bread never expires.
Right.
He just comes down in the form of Jesus, according to John chapter 6. Jesus says he's the bread from heaven.
Yeah, I get it.
But that being said, let's read 34.
All right.
Which we should have included it with 33, but that's fine.
I know. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that it might be preserved. And then we already talked about that.
Right. Yep.
Number 35?
35.
The Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan.
Yeah. It's interesting that it didn't say they ate quail.
Yeah.
For the whole time. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's like they just forgot about the quail at the end.
Did it say the quail was coming every day too?
Yeah, every evening.
Really?
Yeah, manna in the morning, quail in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just thought maybe it was out of season or something.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be. So the last thing.
That's crazy.
Is interesting. In verse 35, it says, until they came to a habitable land. Which we assume is the land of Canaan. But that being said, what they're suggesting here is that until they entered the land of Canaan, the land that they were dwelling in was just not inhabitable. Which is interesting for the next chapter, because in the next chapter, they're going to run into a people group that are living out there. So it had to be inhabitable. And remember, Moses' father-in-law is from Midian. Midian is basically where they're at right now. They're really close to Midian.
Okay.
That was habitable. People were living there. So maybe this is exaggerating a little bit.
Well, yours says habitable, but mine doesn't say habitable.
Oh, what's yours say?
They just came to a land that was settled.
Oh, interesting. I didn't bother to actually look up what was in the text. In the Hebrew text. So this is verse 35?
Yeah.
What does it say there? Dun, 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 dun. Oh. Yeah. Interesting. So the word used here, yeshav, I mean, it's referred to something. It's a verb to dwell or to lie down or to inhabit. So I can see why they would say came to a habitable land. Let me see what the verbal tense is here.
So it makes more sense to be settled since that's exactly what you said happened, right?
Yeah. So it's a passive participle form. So it's saying as far as they came to a habitable land would be better. A participle is typically like an ing, like habitating.
A land that was habited?
Well, I think what they're saying is until they came upon a land that was inhabited as an ongoing, but not necessarily requiring the ing ending for the participle. But I think the NRSV did a pretty good job here. But that's the NRSV does a fine job there. But I see why the NIV use the phrase "that was settled." I could see why they would do that. The problem is, in the actual wording, they're adding something in it. They're saying a land that was settled, but in Hebrew it would say a land, and it would say it was settled. They would add a pronoun to the end of the word. Right? They would attach a pronoun there to let you know that the thing being settled was an it or a thing. And that's not actually in here. You've just got a standard verb in the passive tense. In the participle form, there's no actual pronoun added on here. So as far as I can tell, the NRSV did a little bit better of a job, describing the state of affairs.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing wrong with the way the NIV did it. They just made it a little more, they put their little spin on it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's interesting. The Hebrew language is flexible. You know what I mean? Like there's some flexibility there. That's why we will never have two English translations that are identical. Because all these words are a little bit elastic and they've got a semantic range. But that being said, I think what we can learn from this is that the narrator of the story is at least indicating that they were in the Badlands for a long time. The whole time they were out there, they didn't really get to stay anywhere decent.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
I get that.
Should we end on the
very important number 36?
Probably the most important part of the whole chapter.
Yeah. Save the best for last.
Yeah.
An omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
Yeah, funny
The end.
that you would need to add that there.
Right?
Since it was already mentioned. Oh, it wasn't mentioned earlier.
That's the thing.
Right.
That's why it was a spoiler when I brought it up.
That's right. See, I forgot that we spent so much time talking about that my brain already put it into the narrative, but it wasn't there yet. Yeah, so an omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
I thought it was just part of the footnotes at the bottom,
Well, I have a theory.
Yes.
So we talked about the omer a long time ago, back in ye olden days when I was in Bible college. And as to what it could be. And my conclusion, and some others agreed, was the reason why this snippet is even in the text is because at the time of writing, they didn't know what an omer was either. Like somebody had to tell them that an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. You wouldn't need that explanatory note unless the people reading it didn't know what an omer was. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's like if you were reading a historical narrative and it talked about a furlong.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in our day knows what a furlong is.
Right.
So if you have a narrative where it keeps talking about a furlong, some point in the narrative it's going to have to say, oh yeah, by the way, a furlong, this really old thing, is actually equal to this. So to me, this is really interesting because it lends credibility to the original story, even though it is in fact betraying the authorship of the story. So the part of the story that we have written down for us today that we can read was clearly written later about an earlier time, right? And that gap can be pretty big. But the fact that they chose to include the whole narrative referring to an omer, just a completely irrelevant measuring system that nobody was even using at the time of writing, I think really lends credence to their ability to try to hold on to the traditions of the past, despite the fact that they're not even relevant sometimes, but that they felt so dearly about their tradition that they want to preserve as much of it as possible, even if some of the parts that they're preserving is kind of a silly thing. The Jewish people, by and large, have been some of the best people groups in terms of preserving their heritage that we've ever seen on the planet.
I guess they had to, huh?
Yeah.
Since everybody was trying to wipe them out.
The whole time. Yeah, I mean, hell, God was trying to wipe them out half the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All right. Well, I think we beat that horse sufficiently dead, did we not?
Oh yeah, it's very dead.
Yeah. I do enjoy dissecting the chapters, and I know if you're in the audience, it can feel tedious because we go on so many rabbit trails and we address one or two verses at a time. But to be honest, this is how a good Bible study works. And like when I was in Bible college, and they're doing hermeneutical classes for entry students, they might say, the first thing you want to do when you're getting ready to study a passage, you want to read the whole passage, and then you would diagram the passage in terms of like a flow chart. What actually happens in the chapter, and then you might even do a what's the word I'm looking for? An outline, a narrative outline after that. And then you would go verse by individual verse through the whole thing. You never skip over anything. And I feel like that's what people are missing when they read the Bible, is they just want to get through parts of it and they miss all the good detail. And that's what I enjoy about doing the Bible study with you, is we actually get to touch on all that detail. And it's tedious for some people, but for us, I feel like that's really where you learn the most things, because we can look at the text and say, "Oh, there's some things that I've never noticed before," and then there's two of us here, so we can actually dialogue. And sometimes it turns out that I've got a dumb idea, and sometimes it turns out that you've got a genius idea, because you've never had a dumb idea, except for the berries, maybe.
Right.
And to me, I think this is the most. This is the best way to study the Bible, is to sit down, take your time, spend 2 hours on a single chapter and dissect every word of it until you've got some sort of a sensible solution and something to say about it.
And never get through the Bible, even when you're like 100,
Oh, we'll get there eventually.
No, we won't.
Well, it'd be faster if we weren't doing it once a week, but we've got responsibilities.
Well, yes,
I've got responsibilities.
We both do.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure. Yeah,
we both work very hard.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I mean, you do work with hardwood.
I do.
So you do work hard.
I work. Yeah.
Okay.
Ruin it.
So with that, I think we're done for the night, huh?
Oh, we did it.
I know we did do it, didn't we?
Yeah.
All right, I'm proud of us.
Yeah.
All right,
great.
We'll see you in a week, guys.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy Exodus 16, and next week we got Exodus 17, and it's going to be a blast. I was trying to think of a word on the fly to be a pun for what happened next week, and nothing came up. I couldn't do it. I apologize.
I don't know what's happening next week, so I can't help you.
I know. It would have been funny to me, at least. Maybe I'll pull it out next week.
Yeah, do it, man.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys, for being here, and we'll see you in 7 days.
All right.